In the sweltering heat of a remote South Atlantic afternoon, a 51-year-old man lay dying in a modest, damp room on the isolated island of St. Helena, a far cry from the opulent beds he had known for 2 decades. Once a man whose presence seemed to electrify half the world, his body was now pale, swollen, and ravaged by a mysterious illness that baffled the English doctors who tended him. His hands, once used to signing treaties that reshaped Europe and issuing commands that sealed the fate of millions, trembled uncontrollably as he muttered in French, words his English guards could not comprehend. This man was Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of the French, crowned before the Pope, a conqueror whose campaigns stretched from Madrid to Moscow, a ruler who instilled fear in kings and transformed common men into marshals. Yet, as the relentless tropical rain lashed the decaying windows of Longwood House, Napoleon confronted an enemy no army could ever defeat. A slow, humiliating decline, stripped of the glory that had defined his life. How could the greatest conqueror of the modern era end his days as a sick prisoner on a lonely rock in the middle of the ocean? To grasp the full magnitude of Napoleon's fall, from the imperial throne to the exile on St. Helena, we must first look back to the height of his power and see how his boundless ambition ultimately became his undoing. His tragic end is more than a story of illness and exile. It is a stark reminder of how pride and fame can turn into catastrophe, and that even the most powerful individuals in history cannot escape the consequences of their choices. In 1804, Napoleon Bonaparte stood at the very summit of absolute power. At just 35, he crowned himself Emperor of the French in a dazzling ceremony at Notre Dame Cathedral, compelling Pope Pius VII to travel all the way from Rome to witness his rise. It was a bold act of audacity that stunned all of Europe. A Corsican of humble beginnings, who had climbed the ranks through sheer military brilliance, now dared to place himself on equal footing with emperors whose dynasties had lasted for centuries. By 1804, Napoleon's empire spanned from the Netherlands to Italy, ruling, directly or indirectly, over some 70 million people. His armies were seen as unstoppable, his legal and administrative reforms admired even by rivals, and his tactical genius widely respected. Paris had become the beating heart of Europe, and the French hailed Napoleon as a modern Charlemagne, the man restoring their nation's glory. Yet, at the very height of his power, Napoleon began sowing the seeds of his own downfall. Blinded by relentless ambition, he dismissed peace offers that might have secured his empire and ensured his dynasty's future. Instead, he plunged into increasingly perilous campaigns, gradually draining both his resources and the aura of invincibility that had once surrounded him. The first serious crack in his armor appeared in Spain. In 1808, in his quest to dominate the Iberian Peninsula, he made the fateful decision to depose the Spanish royal family and place his brother Joseph on the throne of Madrid. This sparked a brutal guerrilla conflict that would claim the lives of 200,000 French soldiers over 6 years. The Peninsular War became what Napoleon himself would later call his Spanish ulcer, a relentless, bleeding wound that sapped his strength and revealed, for the first time, that even the mighty French army could be defeated. But the fatal mistake that would ultimately decide Napoleon's destiny came in Russia. In 1812, enraged by Tsar Alexander's refusal to uphold the continental blockade against England, Napoleon gathered the largest army Europe had ever seen, 600,000 men from 20 nations, including French, Germans, Poles, Italians, and Dutch, a true reflection of the empire's reach. Yet this army also exposed his growing reliance on troops whose loyalty was uncertain, many of whom were not even French. The Russian campaign began that summer with Napoleon's trademark confidence. He anticipated a swift, decisive victory that would compel Alexander to accept his terms and restore French prestige after the setbacks in Spain. Instead, he encountered an enemy that avoided traditional confrontations, retreating relentlessly and destroying anything that might aid the invaders along the way. This ruthless scorched-earth tactic shattered Napoleon's plans, stretching his supply lines far beyond what was sustainable. Napoleon entered Moscow on September 14, 1812, expecting triumph. He believed that taking the Russian capital would force Tsar Alexander to negotiate. Instead, he found a nearly deserted city, soon engulfed in flames. Over 5 days, fire consumed 3/4 of Moscow, leaving no possibility of using it as a winter base. Trapped in a ruined city with dwindling supplies, Napoleon confronted the Russian winter far earlier than he had anticipated. The retreat from Moscow, which began on October 19, 1812, became one of history's most catastrophic military disasters. Relentless Cossack attacks, collapsing supply lines, and freezing temperatures turned the once proud Grande Armée into a starving, desperate horde. Soldiers perished by the thousands from cold, hunger, and exhaustion. Horses were eaten or abandoned, and military discipline disintegrated. By the time the remnants crossed the Niemen River in December, only 40,000 of the original 600,000 soldiers remained fit for combat. The disaster didn't just destroy an army, it shattered Napoleon's image of invincibility. The kings who had once feared him now sensed a chance to reclaim their freedom. In 1813, the Sixth Coalition united nearly all of Europe against France. Russia, Prussia, Austria, England, Sweden, and dozens of smaller states joined forces to finally crush Napoleon. France, exhausted from 20 years of relentless warfare and with 200,000 soldiers still trapped in Spain, was ill-equipped to resist. Despite these overwhelming odds, Napoleon still showcased his tactical genius. In battles at Lutzen, Bautzen, and Dresden, he defeated numerically superior armies, proving his brilliance on the battlefield remained unmatched. But tactical victories could not erase his fundamental strategic disadvantage. France lacked the manpower and resources to sustain continuous losses, while the Allies could always muster more soldiers. The Battle of Leipzig, fought from October 16 to 19, 1813, became Europe's largest battle to that point. 600,000 men clashed in a struggle that would shape the continent's future. Napoleon led 200,000 troops against a 400,000-strong coalition determined to push him out of Germany. For 3 days the battle swung between hope and despair, but eventually the Allies' sheer numbers prevailed. Leipzig's defeat forced Napoleon to abandon his German conquests and retreat to France. For the first time since the Revolution, foreign armies were marching toward Paris. France was exhausted, allies had turned against him, and Napoleon faced enemies intent on ending his reign forever. The 1814 campaign in France revealed Napoleon's unmatched military brilliance one final time. With just 70,000 men, a shadow of his former armies, he confronted 300,000 advancing allies. For 2 months, he waged a series of masterful battles, delaying and surprising the enemy at every turn. Yet even the greatest commander could not defy numbers. Every victory cost irreplaceable soldiers, while the Allies could endlessly replace theirs. When Paris finally fell on March 31, 1814, Napoleon realized that even his own capital had turned against him. The French Senate he had built voted for his abdication, and the marshals who owed him everything refused to keep fighting. On April 6, 1814, Napoleon's first abdication marked the abrupt end of his rule. The Allies, in a gesture of generosity they would soon regret, allowed him to keep the title of emperor and rule over the small Mediterranean island of Elba. For most men, this gilded exile would have been enough. But Napoleon had never been content with anything less than greatness. On Elba, he spent 10 months obsessively planning his return, studying reports of French unrest under the restored Bourbon monarchy, secretly communicating with supporters, and meticulously preparing a comeback that would shock the world. On February 26, 1815, Napoleon escaped Elba with just 1,000 men, but he carried with him the unwavering belief that destiny had more in store. The 100 days, from March to June 1815, became both his most dazzling triumph and his deepest tragedy. Napoleon's return to France was a testament to his personal charisma. Troops sent to capture him defected to his side. Cities welcomed him with open celebration, and within 20 days, he was once again Emperor of the French at the Tuileries. It was a stunning demonstration of his influence over the French people. Yet Europe's powers had no intention of letting history repeat itself. They immediately declared him illegitimate, and mobilized massive armies to crush him. Knowing he wouldn't have time to rebuild his forces, Napoleon decided to strike first, hoping to defeat the Allied armies separately before they could join forces. The Waterloo campaign was meant to be a lightning strike, a return to the rapid, decisive victories that had made him legendary. His plan was daring: march swiftly into Belgium, crush Blücher's Prussian army, and then turn on Wellington before the Austrians and Russians could intervene. It was a high-risk strategy that could have succeeded, but only with perfect timing and a touch of fortune. The Battle of Waterloo, fought on June 18, 1815, turned into a series of disastrous mistakes that sealed Napoleon's fate. Weakened by illness, his judgment faltered, delaying the attack and giving Wellington crucial time to fortify his positions. The revolutionary tactics that had once overrun Europe struggled against disciplined British troops and superior artillery. When Blücher's Prussians arrived that afternoon, Napoleon's doom was inevitable. After hours of futile assaults, the exhausted French army collapsed. Napoleon fled the battlefield by carriage, marking the definitive end of his military career. At 46, the greatest conqueror of the modern era had fought his final battle. His second abdication on June 22, 1815, was far harsher than the first. This time, there would be no generosity, no gilded exile, only the finality of defeat. The European powers were determined that Napoleon would never threaten the peace again. They chose the remote island of St. Helena, over 1,000 kilometers from the African coast, as his final prison. Its isolation and harsh climate made escape impossible. For a man used to grand imperial palaces, the tropical heat, humidity, and barren surroundings were a slow, cruel punishment. The 2-month voyage aboard HMS Northumberland added humiliation to his exile. Napoleon was no longer treated as an emperor, but as an ordinary prisoner. His movements were restricted, letters censored, and he was constantly watched by British officers. This was only the beginning of 6 years of confinement. Longwood House, where he would spend his final days, was a modest, damp residence built for colonial administrators, not kings. Termites, poor ventilation, and tropical pests made life unbearable. For a man who once ruled Europe's greatest palaces, this was a deliberate attempt to crush his spirit. Even worse was the psychological toll. A brilliant mind used to commanding armies and nations was reduced to dictating memoirs to fellow exiles. With no real challenge, his intellect slowly atrophied. Governor Hudson Lowe, Napoleon's British overseer, was petty and vindictive. He refused to acknowledge Napoleon's imperial title, insisting on General Bonaparte, and imposed petty rules that further limited his already constrained freedom. Every day became a struggle against not just isolation, but deliberate humiliation. As the years wore on, Napoleon's health steadily deteriorated. He suffered from severe stomach pains, constant nausea, weakness, and a jaundiced complexion that hinted at liver disease, ailments British doctors blamed on the tropical climate. Some modern historians speculate he may have been slowly poisoned with arsenic, though this theory remains debated. During his final 2 years, Napoleon rarely left Longwood House. The boundless energy that had once driven him to conquer Europe was gone, replaced by a lethargy that sharply contrasted with the vitality of his earlier life. He spent long days in bed, sometimes muttering about past battles, other times sinking into deep, silent reflection that troubled his companions. The last months of his life were marked by pain and growing isolation. Even among his fellow exiles, tensions rose, quarrels and unrest added to his suffering. The man who had inspired fierce loyalty in millions now struggled to maintain harmony among a few. In his final moments, Napoleon seemed trapped in the past. He murmured of Austerlitz, of the Grande Army marching across Europe, of kings who once trembled at his name. It was as if his mind, unable to face the present, sought refuge in memories of a time when he was the most powerful man in the world. Napoleon passed away on the afternoon of May 5, 1821, in lonely, pitiable isolation. Only a handful of fellow exiles were by his side as he took his last breath. He whispered names: Fran, Arm, Ted, Darm, Josephine, the echoes of a life filled with power and passion. The man who once commanded vast armies died alone on a remote island, far from the world he had dominated and the people he had loved. A British autopsy cited stomach cancer as the cause of death. Though the exact circumstances remain debated, it is clear that exile had wounded him more deeply than any battlefield ever could. Napoleon's spirit, broken by isolation and loss, left him as vulnerable in death as he had once been invincible in life. His funeral on St. Helena was stark and unceremonious, a humbling contrast to the grandeur that had defined his reign. Following British orders to prevent the grave from becoming a shrine, he was buried in an unmarked spot beneath a willow tree. Even in death, Napoleon's end was solitary and stripped of glory. It was not until 1840, 19 years later, that his remains were returned to France. King Louis-Philippe arranged for a grand ceremony, finally honoring the man whose ambition and genius had reshaped Europe, in a striking reversal from the lonely exile where his life had quietly ended. Napoleon's legacy is a striking blend of brilliance and tragedy, a story that continues to mesmerize the world more than 2 centuries after his death. He proved that one individual could rise to unimaginable heights of power and influence. Yet his story also warns of the destructive force of unchecked ambition, capable of toppling even the most gifted leaders. Beyond the battlefield, his legal and administrative reforms reshaped societies far beyond the borders of his empire. But the wars he waged claimed millions of lives and cast a long shadow of suffering over Europe. From a revolutionary hero championing liberty, equality, and fraternity, Napoleon evolved into an imperial despot, bending entire nations to serve his personal desires. His rise and fall stand as a stark reminder of how absolute power can corrupt even the greatest minds. Ultimately, his downfall on the remote island of St. Helena demonstrates the peril of pride and stubbornness. Had he embraced peace when offered, he might have preserved much of his empire and left the world as a respected ruler. Instead, his refusal to accept limits led to total ruin and a solitary death on a distant, windswept rock in the Atlantic. At a deeper level, Napoleon's life illustrates both the heights that individual genius can reach and the dangers it can bring. His extraordinary skill in military strategy and governance reshaped Europe and left a lasting mark on the modern world. Yet his unbridled ambition brought widespread suffering and ultimately destroyed much of what he had achieved. Napoleon's death on St. Helena remains one of the most striking tragedies in human history. The man who once redrew the map of Europe ended his life as a forgotten prisoner, abandoned by former allies and overlooked by former enemies. His final years on a remote, tropical island serve as a powerful reminder that even the greatest conquerors are mortal, and that ambition without wisdom almost always leads to ruin. The tragic end of Napoleon Bonaparte continues to offer timeless lessons about power, ambition, and human mortality. His story reminds us that great achievements often walk hand in hand with perilous pride, that even the most extraordinary victories can lead to disaster, and that no one, no matter how mighty, is exempt from the consequences of their choices. Napoleon lived as he did and died the same way, leaving behind a legacy that burns intensely, inspiring awe while serving as a warning for generations to come.